Welcome to God with George Ortega and Joshua Bond. Basically, just as a brief kind of like getting you up to date, we decided that creating the outline for the God book is something we definitely want to do, but not. We want to basically work on other projects, or actually lead up to that. So anyway, so we're returning to kind of like the ordinary, the previous format of just talking about God, about, whatever we want in relation to God, but just trying to our challenge and in your challenge as an audience is to keep it as focused as possible on God, but then again, then to understand how that relates to our lives. So Joshua, great to see you again. Start us off. What is it do you want to talk about God?
You and I have been having some conversations and playing around with how consciousness is how we experience God. So, with different definitions of God that we've been playing with, one thing we came up with is,
What, Josh? Did I say that it was 2:18 Eastern time during our introduction?
I think you missed that.
All right, because I just got to explain. Josh and I have been doing a few beers and stuff. So if it sounds like that, that's how it is. We're partying. It's Friday. All right. Okay. I'm sorry, Josh. Go ahead.
That's the point I was trying to talk around to, because I didn't know if I was supposed to say it if you missed it. So that's what was happening there. So what we're doing with this experiment here that I was trying to talk my way into is experiencing different forms of consciousness, different states of consciousness. Everything is a drug. Of course, alcohol is a drug. Everything we eat affects our consciousness and causes us to have different forms of consciousness, some more profound than others. And if we can figure out how to hack this, then we can create effectively the ultimate religion or ultimate version of God, since God is everything, including our consciousness, and also all causality, which is the explanation for why our consciousness does what it does. So it's obviously not us, it's God. And this is, so if we can play around and kind of experiment with different states of reality of consciousness, that's giving us different realities, and cause that having different realities is what affects our behavior, right? And if we can hack that, instead of us just being this haphazard mono consciousness culture, right, that rejects all other forms of consciousness or, crazy experience, right? If we can accept that and embrace that and hack that and engineer it, then we can start to match up what form of consciousness should you be in for each situation, right? So part of the fun part of it is feeling like we have really good ideas that we're going to articulate that we've gotten from the insight of altering our consciousness. But when it comes out, because when it comes out not as well, or people, it's easy to judge. You could make a easy critique of it just because we're not sounding all there and talking how we normally do. But if you can look beyond that, then if you realize that when we alter our consciousness, we may have lost parts of the speaking ability like we normally speak, and able to experience solutions in other parts of the brains, get in part with other parts of consciousness.
Right? All right, Josh, I want to connect what you just said with this idea of communing with God. Ordinarily, we commune with God through rituals sometimes, like blessings we say after whatever, but primarily through words, through thoughts. And I think what you're suggesting is that by moving from this kind of verbal consciousness, we can experience God, reality, more clearly.
Yeah. I mean, that's a perfect example because this verbal reality. What is this verbal reality? If we all live in this, most of human society lives in this verbal reality, and so if you hear from God, all of a sudden you're leaving that verbal. Ah, if we're all confined to this verbal reality, or yeah, then if hearing from God is not verbal and it's some form of other consciousness, then we can't hear from God if we have this overemphasis on verbal reality.
Or it could be, it's like, yes, no, there's definitely much valuable information from hearing God's word. But what perhaps the Buddhists understand much better than we, and I think we would benefit from understanding, is by shifting from the verbal to this more general, nebulous, numinous experience, we may be able to experience God much more clearly.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up because I was just thinking of that as well. This interesting perspective we talked about last episode of, um, of all the religions, Buddhism being the one that was more what you might call atheist, right? Not a atheist, but a theism, as in a religious. So, like in the sense that it's not a real religion, a lot of people say, because they don't have a certain set of gods or one true God kind of thing, right? But they have a much more emphasis on understanding consciousness first and meditating and trying to experiment with what is consciousness. Um, and that really, yeah, has been such a huge understanding in my life to come at the awareness. Like when I figured that out, it had allowed me to have a much more profound respect for Buddhism and finally accept it when I probably rejected it as having much value in the past.
Yeah, Josh, like Judaism is great, Christianity is great, but the Buddhists understand something we really don't and desperately need to. This idea of just being, just it's not what we do in life, just sitting and experiencing, the concept of meditation, which is so central to Buddhism, just being and experiencing reality without ambitions, without obligations, without judgment, and in this state of just being, then we can access God in a way that is not all that possible in various senses within our current or customary lifestyle.
Yeah. Um, so we have the concept of being present or being here now, being in the moment, right? I think that relates to what you said there. And I guess one of the big questions could be like, if that's so important, so valuable, and so allows us to have good relationships with each other, with our reality, with consciousness as it's happening, and allows us to accept ourselves and realize that consciousness is just happening to us. Reality is just happening to us. We don't have this magical free will that can be judged and condemned if it doesn't happen the way somebody else thinks it should, right? Or our response to it isn't what somebody else thinks it should, or some expectation that they or we might have for ourselves that's just for some whatever reason, for God's will, God's reality, not possible at the moment, right? And so being here now, being present, being in the moment, what stops us from doing that, and what helps it, right? And that should be a significant part of any religion or understanding of God, I think.
Yeah, Josh, let's focus on that because it's interesting. I mean, just to give the audience a bit of background, I started publicizing this understanding that free will is an illusion back in 2010. And more recently, though, I've been focusing on God, whereas Josh has completely understood the non-reality of free will and the benefits of overcoming that illusion. So I kind of like, I want to shift back to that. Let's talk about, like, in other words, like, a proper understanding of God is that God created the universe. God is all powerful. Nothing happens that God is not making happen. And so because of that, we do not have a free will. We are manifesting God's will. And again, like what Josh has been pushing me, just because he gets how important it is. And I guess I've gotten in the past also, but I just got, I thought, well, maybe we should focus on God more. But now I'm thinking we can combine the two. In other words, like, yes, explain to the world, that we don't have a free will, and this belief in free will is extremely harmful in ways that would surprise people. And in order to create a better world, we and to understand God more clearly, more accurately, more completely, we would benefit greatly from shifting that from that free will perspective to the understanding that God's will is the only will.
Yeah, George. Right off the bat there, you what'd you say? I was expecting you to disagree with what I said, and you agreed with it and spoke well of it, and that threw me for a loop, right? So um, I wanted to. Man, this is weird. So the ability to talk about what's really going on in the moment, right? And that's what's causing me to lose my ability to speak in this conversation as well as I was earlier, or well as I normally do in a call that I don't drink, right? George mentioned we had had a few beers, um, and I never drink. I hardly ever drink. To give you some perspective, I didn't even have my first beer until my 30s, no alcohol at all. And this wasn't because I was of a religion that forbade alcohol. Um, it's just it was a byproduct that we'll talk about of aspects of reality that religion get wrong, right? But I don't want to go on that tangent right now. So this ability to, so I want to talk about what's going on. So I'm trying to talk about what's going on with me in the moment, right? Because I have this sense that this seems very strange, and I'm judging it. I'm judging how I'm talking, and I'm trying to tell myself not to judge it, just to let it flow, because that's going to sound better, right? And the more I judge it, the worse it gets. But to realize we all do this, like, I'm explaining this as if I'm, had too much to drink or drinking, and it's altering my way I'm talking and ability to talk. But we have to realize our sober reality is like this too, to the extent we blame ourselves for our failures or our faults that this belief in free will causes us to do, right? So this belief in free will, you can see how it's almost like a bad drug that we've been infected with or forced upon us or whatever, in the way that we view, other bad drug use that would cause problems. And we'd say, oh, he's a drug addict, or he's an alcoholic, that's why he's acting that way or had that outburst, right? But if we view this illusion of free will this way, then we can have a much more accurate understanding of how it does impair our consciousness when we're blaming ourselves, judging ourselves, and stopping us from being able to be in the moment. And this is a healing process George has been helping me develop and get through, kind of behind the scenes mostly.
Let's explore this, because basically, like, I've been drinking beer, you've been drinking beer, and it's affecting how we're addressing the audience. And I think it's important. In other words, like, let's talk about this within the context of theology and God. I conjecture that when they discovered alcohol, however many thousand years ago that was, that was a milestone in our development as human beings, because it allowed them not only to feel much more comfortable with each other, to lose those inhibitions, those anxieties that alcohol makes, lessens, minimizes. It also, I believe, opened up the receptiveness to the idea of God, that God exists, that that we can communicate with and interact with God.
Yeah. Um, I lost my train of thought because I was. Might have to let you keep talking. Hold on one second. I'm finding as these moments I have trouble saying what was on my heart, right? And I try to analyze, why am I having this trouble in the moment? Would I, because to me, I feel like this is almost live TV, and I got to perform, and I got my words together, and I got to have a good conversation, a good presentation, right? And as soon as I start to get neurotic about that, that's actually what causes me to forget and connect to the emotional reaction, the gut reaction that I had to what George just said, and to continue the conversation on. And so I try to soften that and say, don't judge yourself. Don't, you know, because immediately I'm thinking, oh, this is irresponsible. Like, all these nagging voices in my head are coming up of, oh, this is irresponsible. What if some young kid sees this and becomes an alcoholic because of you? All this dogmatic, just like the reefer madness, and the way that cannabis, was made illegal illegitimately, a long time ago, and we're just now dealing with that as a culture, right? Like, I have a whole lot of those kind of voices in my head because of the perspective on consciousness and self condemnation, essentially self hate. The what we think of as fundamentalist ideas of sin, right? Because I have so many voices on that, I'm just so overcritical, and it's every time I stop and realize, why did I just forget that emotional message I wanted to deliver to George, and analyze why that happened, I saw that neurotic part of myself being more self-critical until I lost connection with self.
And Josh, that's a perfect example of why and how we don't have a free will. If we had free wills, we'd be able to think about anything we would want to think about and talk about anything we wanted to talk about without anything distracting us. Without, I'm definitely a little blitz from the, but anyway.
Good.
But that's, again, like, think about your experience, people. Can you feel as happy as you want to feel? No. I mean, the answer is no. I'm sorry. Can you be as good as you want to be? No, you cannot. All right. If you can't be as happy and as good as you want to be, how do you believe you have a free will? It's not what. We got to address this. Like, they don't like to hear this. They don't understand. Josh, explain to them why, talk to them in a way that they will kind of like, just appreciate how it would be in their benefit to understand that we don't have a free will. We have God's will.
Yeah, George, I think you just did that when you made the point that we can't be as happy as we want to be, right? Where people have failed at explaining this and getting it in past is they failed to explain, by accepting this, then you can have much more happiness, because then you can accept that your will is caused and look at those causes and try to solve those problems. Whereas otherwise, you believe you have a free will, and the cause of the problem is obviously you're flawed, right? And you blame yourself, right? And there's not a lot of science and causality around that. You don't get very far. But if you can look at, oh, I had this for breakfast, I don't normally have that, and I felt kind of irritable or gassy or whatever today, and that caused me to just be uncomfortable in my body, and I just didn't feel on, and then somebody came up to me and said something and I went off on them, right? If you can realize that causality, or whatever it is, then you can basically, uh, you know, solve that problem, right? So basically, you were God, you became God by accepting that, because in the sense that, you know, in the sense that if we said that sin separates us from God, so if God could solve sin, or if there wasn't sin, then we would be connected to God, right? You just played that role, right? And you did that. So, that's why it's so profound to understand that not just ending suffering, ending failure, but also happiness. We can pull these little knobs and levers, right? The ego can basically become this dashboard of controls, instead of this thing that's controlling us, right? And then we learn to pull which knobs and levers, right? Instead of this story of, oh, it's just free will, you failed because you're a flawed person, you deserve to go to hell, right? No, we become scientists, agents of our reality, much more so.
Yeah. You you said a lot. I'm not sure what to respond to. But that's up. Let's see. I'm gonna shift from a cognitive realm of, like, kind of like searching through thoughts and cognitions, to a more experiential realm of just, trying to sense, um, kind of like the subsequent evolution of your train of thought. Um, and perhaps if I wasn't on as much,
You know
but
what, Joe?
I
Just
am.
say whatever you want to. Don't even respond to me. Just say whatever you're thinking about. What do you want to talk about? Because
All
I think
right, so let's. All right,
consciousness is much better. So this isn't going to be like it normally is. It's going to be George saying whatever he wants in his brain. I'm going to be talking about whatever I want. We're just going to take turns switching every once in a while.
sounds good. All right, so basically, yes, God. I mean, like, I've known that God exists as long as I can remember, but now I'm not just much more deeply and completely understanding God, but also communicating with God so much more often. And it's world changing. It's just, it it elevates reality to a much more ethical, meaningful state.
All right. So what I'm going to talk about that's probably completely unrelated to that, but the fact that it is unrelated doesn't mean I don't think what he just said was awesome. All right. We're developing this tool, this strategy. So see, next time we have this call and do this with some alcohol, we have this now tool in our toolbox of recognizing, oh, this feels a little off. How's the audience perceiving it? Is it working for the audience? Like when we feel that ourselves, we can pull up this tool, right? We hacked this illusion of free will that normally, if you just believed in sin, you'd be like, oh, and you thought alcohol was bad, you'd just be like, oh, those drunkards, right? But by doing this, it's also giving us access to parts of consciousness, for me, authenticity, connection to my emotions and feelings, right? That I can, that are blocked off otherwise without this chemical agent. And
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, yeah, and actually, I mean, like, you're basically leading to what's happening, that, with cannabis, people are like understanding it's a medicine, and that, it really helps people to endure, the challenges of life, physical, emotional. And so, yeah, I think maybe, we've experimented with beer, and it seems to have gone well. So I would, we should do more episodes where we, again, what I drink are these Keystone Naturals, whatever they, it's about a can and a half, but it's more than that, because basically, that the beer that I drank growing up in the 70s especially was about 3% alcohol, and this is about 6% almost, 5.9. So anyway, so I must, you know, in this what's 1.5 cans, because they sell these tall, you know, I must be on like 3-4 cans of beer or whatever, and it feels great. That's what I'm saying. So you know, just to progress Josh's train of thought, that that yes, that we should experiment with, you know, combining the consumption of beer with these show episodes in order to illustrate the spiritual benefit of alcohol.
Yeah, George. I really want to share that I'm so grateful you encouraging me to do this, and that personally, it's been a really good experience. I know, like, to an audience member that may not appreciate exploring consciousness to have better lives and happiness, may not get all of this and why we're doing this, right? You know, we're using alcohol in common, not certainly not because it's the best for doing this, but even if it's not the very best, we should at least do it sometimes so we can have that part of consciousness and see and learn about it and see if anything that we understand there about ourselves or about reality is helpful in our sober state of consciousness, our more common states of consciousness. And by doing this, we understand God more, because God is all of reality. God is all of causality. God created all these possibilities for these states of consciousness when he created everything. And this is, you know, a spiritual pursuit, right? It's messy, it's a little sloppy, because traditionally religions haven't been this open-minded. They haven't had an admiration, understanding of the value of all forms of consciousness, right? And they felt threatened and like it was competition for the church, right? So they demonized them, they burned them at the stake, whatever it was. You know, these were prophets, shamans, you know, thought leaders, you know, great people that were crucified because in the name of God, some God, right? But I'll let you close out the show, George.
All right. So yeah, again, like I've got like it's 2:43 p.m. Eastern time. I've got a 3:15 other Zoom call that I got to make. And what I'd like to do, since this is going so well, you know, if Josh wants to do this also, we will do the next episode right now. We're going to end this episode in 30 seconds and just continue this conversation, because again, I think the connection between the state that we're in, you know, derived from alcohol, and this, you know, more clear, more complete and optimistic conception of God is something that that really deserves a much greater exploration. And again, it's also a lot of fun. All right, we will see you next time. Thanks for watching.